Welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie. I am so thrilled and excited for tonight's conversation where we are diving into both the professional and personal aspects around joy. And do we actually have the capacity to handle our dreams coming true or the things we've been working for most of our lives toward actually taking place? Can we actually handle what's on the other side of that? Or do we actually self sabotage? Do we not have what it takes to have the ability and capacity to experience the vulnerability that is joy? And I'm so thrilled and excited to have Amanda, known as Panda, Ludwig here to be with us tonight. Amanda, you are a powerhouse entrepreneur, CFO. You really have been working with, I mean, gosh, you've been working with hundreds of small and medium-sized businesses that spanned the spectrum from tech to restaurant to commercial real estate. You have quite the list of accolades, from being a certified professional business advisor, working with the Institute of Advisors. You've been doing press interviews, and I'm so grateful you're here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this.
Likewise, likewise. Well, Panda, I loved our conversation kind of offline where we were talking about some of your experience in the past that has led to where you are today. And you grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. Is that right?
I did. My father was, what would people say, serial entrepreneur. That was my dad. I never knew him to not own a business, but his businesses were really diverse in background. And so I'm really grateful for that because
Yeah.
I will say one time a journalist asked me the question, I'll never forget it because I remember it was such a surprising question. She said, I said I had started this business, and she said, "What made you think you could do that?" And I didn't have an answer for her question. And I said, it never occurred to me that I couldn't. And I attribute that to having a dad who just, if he saw an opportunity, he went for it. And I don't think he ever, it occurred to him that it was something to think about, that it just, if he saw it and he wanted to go after it, he did it. And so I'm really fortunate to have grown up just seeing him and kind of how he lived his life.
What a gift. My gosh. One of my favorite, I guess you could say, quotes is actually derived from Theodore Roosevelt's speech that he gave called Citizens in the Republic in 1914, where he talks about the man in the arena who goes in and is willing to basically not stand on the sidelines and be the critic, but to fall down and have his face marred by dust and grime, and knows the taste of failure, but also the taste of triumph. And so to that point, clearly it sounds like you grew up in the arena, both by watching your dad, but doing it yourself. And I wanted to ask you, what is your relationship like with failure?
I don't love failure. I mean, most people probably wouldn't say that they love failure. I think I, like anyone, it cuts deep. I don't like it. I don't like how it feels. But I have been able to see the other side of it, and what comes when you've failed enough. You start to see the pattern of, oh, well, if I hadn't have failed there, then such and such would have never come about. And so I think it doesn't make me love failure. It doesn't make it super comfortable. And it's certainly not a place I want to spend a lot of time in. But I've come to greatly appreciate what I learn every time I fall flat on my face. And I have done that enough times. I could probably write not a book, but a whole series. So I can be honest and admit that for sure.
Yeah. I'm curious, for those who didn't have entrepreneurship modeled for them, what would you say are kind of the mindsets that are necessary for those who maybe don't like their current jobs? They are, 9 to 5 employee. Maybe they're looking at this age of AI and knowing that their job, that they are replaceable. And so what would you encourage in terms of really, truly the mindset and kind of the internal state that's necessary for being an entrepreneur?
I think it's really, the starting question should be, what is it that you hate about your job? Because if you're looking to leave your job because you don't like anyone telling you what to do, which is a reason a lot of us wind up starting businesses, It's not a great reason to leave, because what happens is, as a business owner, you think that your time is yours, and then you realize now all the responsibility falls on your shoulders. So now every client can feel like a boss. And then you have new bosses. You have the IRS is your boss now, the health department, depending on what is, you have to think that there's never going to be an industry that you can start a business in that there isn't going to be some type of regulation for you. And so if wanting to leave your job has something to do with authority, that might not be the right reason to leave. That might be something you want to dig a little bit deeper into. And if you want to leave your job because you see a different way it can be done, or a better way that it can be done, what you're seeing around you, and you keep something in your gut keeps saying, I know we could help more people, or I know there's like a better way to create this or do this, that's a really good reason to want to start a business. The mindsets that I think it requires are, because you've already brought it up, not being afraid to fail, or recognizing that at some point as a business owner, you will fail in an area. And if you're willing to do that and say, you know what I'm going to get from this is going to be so much greater than that one failure. I think that bit of mental toughness. I also, because I have an accounting background, fractional CFO work. One of my tests, when people ask me, it's not the most welcomed test, but mine is, if you can't balance your checkbook at home, don't start a business, which is a tough one for a lot of people. That's our spending habits in our own households. It's 10 times more tempting to get into debt if you start a business. And so really focusing on managing money in your own home is a really great way to prepare to go into business. And that's not something a lot of people talk about. And I've just seen too many families lose their houses or their kids' college fund because no one was having that part of the conversation. And I
Wow.
think yes, but again, that's my background. And you asked about mindset. So, a money, what is your money mindset? What's your relationship with money? And I think, there's so many other parts to it, but yeah, starting with what's the reason that you want to start a business? What's the real underlying reason, and getting to the bottom of that before making that choice is really what the decision should be made about.
Good. I love that. One of the things in kind of in our knowing community that we often discuss is getting to the root why. And whenever
Mhm.
you have an emotion, to effectively trace that all the way down to the core root, whether it's a core belief about yourself or about the world, or maybe your boss, or just authority in general, or
Mhm.
even I have a desire for freedom. And maybe you simply are annoyed at having to clock in and out every day. And maybe it feels like
Right,
micromanagement, when
right.
actually it's a core value of yours
Mm.
to have freedom and autonomy of when you're working. So I
Mhm.
love, 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 love that recommendation. And to that point, I wonder, for those of us who are kind of figuring out, well, how do I even know what that is? I love the concept of literally dedicating time throughout your day or throughout your week, let's say, and really setting aside time and like space every single week to kind of ask those questions and maybe go inward a little bit with that dedicated time. Do you have any other advice on kind of how to uncover your why and how to get more clear on that?
You know, I wish I could say I have like great examples and this was my like, oh, this is why I did it. Full transparency, my most recent company that I spent about a decade building before I sold it, I just needed a job. Like, I would love to give you a really inspirational why behind it. My why was I needed a job and I created a job for me. That's really the story. But, kind of behind it is also the fact that I was living in a city that the kind of work that was meaningful to me didn't exist where I lived. And so
Mm.
I created it. And so, really, like, if you really want to get deep into a why, what I wanted to do, what I felt like, kind of matched my skill set and would light me up, that job didn't exist where I live. And so, I needed a job. And instead of just taking a job, doing something I would hate, I specifically remember getting offered a position in the finance department of a warehousing company. And
Oh,
it didn't light me up personally. And I remember calling my mom and being like, she's like, "Did you get the job?" And I'm like, "Yes." And she's like, "It's a good company." "Yes, great pay, great benefits." And I was like, "I don't want to do it. Like this isn't me. I don't want to do it." And so I created something that I was passionate about and I did care about. And that was really for me, creating something that was meaningful work for me, which turned into a company that, then just grew incredibly and employed other people.
yeah.
And so other people who were apparently looking for the same kind of thing. So you just never know when you start something, what will take off and what other people, maybe they're looking for that same kind of work and you're creating it for them. You just never.
Mm. So good. I love that. And to that point, I'm curious around you were talking about needing to effectively create a job for yourself. I wonder how many of us really truly have taken the time to consider what does light me up in the first place, to know what brings me joy. And, it was funny,
Mhm.
just this morning, I was on a call with my business coach, and she asked me that question as I'm looking to kind of build out some things surrounding the book, knowing that's going to be launching in the next few months. And she
Congrats.
asked me, thank you. She was like, what does light you up? Is it speaking on
Mhm.
stages? Is it small intimate communities? Is it hosting retreats? All of which I've done. And I was like, let me get back to you on that,
Yeah.
because I just know every one of those activations is bringing impact. But
Mhm.
what is actually the thing that is filling up my cup? I heard this example Lisa Nichols gave when I was at an Amazon event, and she gave this example of she had a glass of water in a pitcher and she poured it half full, and she said, half of you or many of you will give from a glass half full, and then she filled it up to the top and said, others of you will give from a full glass. And then she
Mhm.
poured and poured, and then there was a basin below, and it filled up. And she said, this overflow is for everybody else. This full glass is for you. And that is just a fundamentally misunderstood concept, I think, for many of us, especially in the small business, even medium-sized business space. I'm working with a client right now, and they're at, just cresting 45 million. And many of them don't have that kind of balance. And, some of them actually aren't filled up by their job. And so they have to have hobbies outside of the business. But then it seems like there's equilibrium, a lack of equilibrium and investment in the company. But some of them actually, their hobby is business, whereas for others, it's not. And so I'm curious, as you've been working with a lot of these folks who go through a business exit,
Mhm.
especially women, you said in the green room that actually there seems to be a proportionate number of women that really struggle with this, where they actually will go through the whole process of exiting their business, which they're so excited about, but then they'll be sitting in the aftermath and really not have joy. And I wanted to ask why you think that is. Was their business actually their hobby? Or
Mhm.
did they not really think through what do I do instead? What's going to replace this, or something completely other?
Yeah. Oh, so much to unpack there. If it's okay, I'm going to start with my experience in exiting my business because there's a step before that that I want to talk about because we're not talking about it, which is there's a lot of people who hate their company. I don't like saying it, right? It's such a strong word, but you can grow to hate your own business. And that happens. We're talking about, doing something that lights you up. And a lot of us start with really good intention. Like that's how it starts. And then when you get into if it does take over your whole life and you're finding you're not doing all of the other things that you used to do or you enjoy or you stop enjoying it, having this space for people like I creating this space by having this conversation where to just acknowledge that like it's okay if you don't love your company anymore. If you started your business and you don't love it anymore, like that's okay. You can sell it, right? Like like I'm very much a love it or list it, right? Like we've all seen the show, like love it or list it can be true for your company. Like we can do some work and you can fall back in love with your company again. And if you don't love it, like you can sell it and that's okay. And that's not a failure. And so that's an important piece of this conversation is do what you love, do what lights you up, start a business in that space if you can. But if you get to the point where you realize it's running you ragged and you don't love it anymore, it's not failing if you decide to sell it. Like, that's okay. And that's just a really, really important piece that I wanted to say. But my experience, it's actually a little bit funny in hindsight, but um, I built my business over about 10 years. At 38, I got diagnosed with a bizarre illness, and I say I was forced to sell my company. The reality is I could have had management run it, but I know me and I'm nosy. So I would not have been able to just sit back and just let someone else run it. Like, I still would have been checking on things. I know me. Like, I know me. So because I know me, I chose to sell so that I could be completely detached, that I could sell it and I could walk away. But my experience was, after selling it, I actually started therapy because I sold my business, which, to your point of it should be the best day of your life, I started therapy because I had this recognition that, like, that's my whole identity. Like, I liked being, girl boss. Like, I like, when people, who are you? What do you do? Like, I was proud of what I did and who I was in that identity as a business owner, and particularly owning a business in a male dominated industry. That just made it even better. I loved that. And so when I sold it, in my head, there was this shift of like, well, like, what's my purpose? Who am I? I mean, I'm just doing medical treatment. And in my head, working on me every day wasn't enough. Like, that wasn't enough reason to be motivated. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to do. And so the funny part is that I actually started, I would make these binders of like all my medical records with the tabs, and like I had to be hyper organized. And I realized what I was doing was I had started making my medical treatment like its own little business, right? Like, that's what I had to manage now, because I needed to manage something, because so much of my ego was tied to that mindset of being a business owner. And so in hindsight, it's really funny. Like, in the moment, it was not funny. In hindsight, very funny. And so that's why now, getting back to work, I love having these conversations about this exit, this end game strategy work that I do, because not all exits are for retirement. There are women who are saying, I built this business and you know what? Now I'm ready to start a family, and I'm ready to sell. I'm ready to exit. And, there's a great podcast that I watched recently. The guy was in his 30s and he had just gotten engaged, and they decided they wanted to buy a boat and they just wanted to travel around the world. So he's like, I want to sell the business and I want to travel with my new bride. Like, that's a great reason to exit, right? There's so many exits before the retirement exit. And so I love to be a voice in that, to say, one, it's not failure if you decide to sell. There's plenty of reasons to sell your business, and be prepared for establishing a new identity when you leave your business, because of this statistic that 75% of people regret it. Now, I don't have data to back this up. I'm a data kind of girl, but I will say the 75% that say that, it's often because they say, I think I left too much money on the table. If I had waited or planned more, I could have had a more lucrative exit. And there is a lot to that. I mean, that's my world, that's my space, right? The numbers, that makes sense to me. But we also know that a big part of that is this detachment from identity, from purpose, from a reason to get out of bed every day, and our friends, right? Sometimes we know our friends from business, sometimes our employees, right? So this whole circle around us all of a sudden disappears. And we wake up and say, okay, well, now who am I? And I do believe truly that that's a big part of the regret when people sell their business, is finding purpose again.
Wow. Man, well, the disassociation from purpose, gosh, isn't that like one of the most deadly things? So, to this point around, do we even have like the internal capacity to handle joy and all that could come from, even the money that can come from an
Yep.
exit, the dopamine hit that comes from exit, and then potentially the dive after, the valley, because it is
Mhm.
a high,
Mhm.
and you can't
Right.
have the peaks without the valleys. So
Mhm.
to that point, I love that you're mentioning purpose, because with this question of what is life giving for me, it is that question of, okay, well, do I even know why am I here? What is the season for me?
Mhm.
So for those people who have the ability to, okay, I'm going to sell my business, and on the other side of that, my goal is to start a family or something, with women very specifically, and maybe
Mhm.
men, but like because I know another man who was retired for 10 years between 30 and 40 after selling his business, and his goal was to invest in his family. So it's both
Mhm.
genders for sure.
Mhm.
But I think that there's that question of, do you have a new target? Because when we're aimless and we're wandering, that's when we get into trouble.
Right. Yeah, if selling is the goal, if that was the whole goal, I do believe that those other people that are more likely to struggle after the exit. And even if selling wasn't the goal, like in my case, I wasn't planning to sell my business at 38. I was still building, growing. I still had big plans for that business. So it was a surprise exit, and more than half of exits are unplanned, right? Death, disease, divorce, disability. They all seem to start with D. But even if it's a surprise exit, then that's sort of the like, what is this? And I call it the life after success. Whatever success, however you've just defined success, success is so often for a season. And so, like, how we've defined it. Now, that's not necessarily the reality, but we defined, like, oh, when I reach this point, I will be successful, which means if that is a specific point in time, there is a point after that point, which is life after success. And so, if that was the high, if the exit was the high, the what's next can be really scary. But
That's so good.
yeah, but if the exit was the "I'm exiting so I can," very, very different mindset, and that's exciting.
Mm,
However, there is that surprise with the realizing that the identity was
yes.
connected. I think that happens whether there's a plan or not after. I think that
Right.
identity detachment can happen either way, unfortunately. It did to me. It absolutely did.
Right. Well, and gosh, and I'm even thinking this whole identity crisis can be related to any peak in our lives. So it could be graduation, it could be moving to a new place. You're all geared up to move, and then you arrive, and it's like, oh, I actually don't know anyone. So one
Mhm.
thing that you mentioned that I think is really important, we're talking about having the capacity to handle joy and the vulnerability that comes with the peak. Sometimes we actually do it to ourselves. Almost like a self-induced valley, because we actually feel so uncomfortable with the success. A coach of mine, she wrote a book called Stop Self-Sabotage, and there's a story in there about this woman who went through the whole process of getting to the top sales in her business. She was ranked top salesperson in her business, and she went home for Thanksgiving, and her family just really couldn't handle her success, and she went back and she could never meet those numbers again. And because she had this internal narrative of, I'm going to lose connection with my family by way of my success. And so
Mhm.
I think that there's so many reasons about why we can go into the valley quickly after, but identity is one. Even to your point of connection, we might be actually not able to connect with those that we want to because of our success, or we might actually be missing those people because our success moved us out of that circle, and it could have just been our team, our employees. We're no longer in that connection, in that circle. So I would love to hear, to that point, around kind of the tenets, like thinking about the tenets of joy. We're talking about having a mission and a purpose, knowing our identity, having a community, and really having people around us, and having that target kind of speaks to that mission. So is there anything else that, when we're looking at this, that you've seen that's really helpful on the other side of a business exit? Those three things: mission, identity, and then community. Is there anything else you would add to that?
I I don't know if this is not really a direct answer to your question, and I wish I had a perfect answer for that, but something that came to me, so I think it's probably important. Sometimes some things come in our mind, it's just because we're meant to say them. So, um, I remember walking in a parking lot with a business owner who, was at the retirement age, some would say past the retirement age. He had had a long run in his business. And I was complaining about my car. Something was going on with it. And he said, well, have one of the guys, he had a crew of mechanics because they had a lot of machinery at their company. He said, well, have one of the guys look at it next week when you come. I said, okay, great. And he said, why don't you get you a new one? And I was like, yeah, maybe I will. And he said, I mean, what do we do this all for anyway? And I will never forget that because I mean, in the moment I was like, you're right. Like, what do we do all this for? And this is someone who had, he's been in the trenches. His company struggled for a period. Now it's very, very successful, after a 30-year run. And this is someone like, he's been there, done that, and said, what do we do it all for anyway? And since then, and this has probably been 7 or 8 years ago, that has shown up so many times in my life that I can just apply it to just about every scenario, right? Like, business, well, what do we do it all for anyway? But that's every single thing in our life. If we just pause and say, well, like, what is it all for? It pushes me to things. It also helps me move away from things that are no longer need to be part of my life, because it's like, well, what is it all for? Actually, that's not for a whole lot. I'm just doing it because it's expected of me, or because I've always done it, or because, and when you put that question on any decision or any movement, the answer just kind of seems to come if you just say, like, well, like, what is it all for? And so that definitely showed up a lot through that transition phase of my life of being the girl boss to being I'm just a patient, I'm just showing up for my test today. That was a pretty significant shift. And yeah, but then to throw the question, well, what is it all for? It was for my health. It's to save my life. And that's what brought back like my ability to focus on that thing. And that was an important thing. Whereas before it was like, this is just getting in the way. It went from something that was getting in the way to, oh, this is a really important thing. And this is the mission now. This is what I'm meant to focus on for this season. And it actually made it a lot easier. So if anyone's in that kind of space of like, I think just pause and ask that question and see if anything comes. Hopefully something will come for you. Like it's shown up for me whenever I ask that question.
I'm so grateful that you're talking about this, Panda, because we have a gentleman here in the chat and he was just sharing, he spent years working so incredibly hard, building 3 businesses and 65-hour weeks, and just found some really tragic news about, his spouse not being faithful. And now he's looking at everything he built, that she now gets 50% of it, from my understanding of common laws in Texas. And it's just so devastating. And I wanted to just kind of hear your thoughts on that. I know that I know you might have some angles here that might be useful if you're willing to kind of go in that direction. But for him, who it's not necessarily there's a business exit per se, but there is this looking at even just financially, potentially the devastation of losing 50% of what you've built and worked for. Do you have any advice or any thoughts or just commiseration?
Yes, I do, but I'm going to have to try to get through it without crying here, because because I have such a similar story in a phase of my life where I went through the exact same thing as this gentleman. And see, I don't know if you can see on camera, but because my heart is so broken for him. But I was in a business that I had built with my spouse, and it meant so much to me. It was, we were helping children. It was a really meaningful line of work for me. And a similar situation happened. So of course our marriage ended, but because he was the face of the company, also that my job ended. So I lost my spouse and I lost a job doing something that was very, very meaningful to me. But on the other side of that, that is the company that I started, that I said, I looked for something that I could create for myself that was meaningful to me, a new kind of meaningful. It was nothing like the work I did before, but it was new and it was very meaningful. And in hindsight, I was really grateful for that change, but it took a long time. It took a really long time, which is why my heart is breaking for this gentleman, because I remember what that was like. But on the other side of that was a new business that brought me a new kind of joy, and a successful exit after that. So I think it's the life after success. It's the what's next, and finding the thing that I never would have thought I would have found something that would mean as much to me as the work I did before, and I did, and it completely transformed my life. And so I found a way to be grateful, but it got harder before it got easier. So hopefully that's encouraging. Of he's doesn't sound like he'll be selling the business anytime soon. Me having to leave that business was, of course, unexpected, but it really, really, really was a transformation in such a good way when the time came. It took a while, but when the time came, it was. I don't want to say the best thing that ever happened. It sounds like it's such a horrible thing to say, but it was the turn in the road that I
Mm.
needed, that I didn't know that I needed at that time.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. My gosh, I was, I talked with someone this morning and they were like, "What got you here today?" And it was just a casual conversation. And I just mentioned, I was like, I'm so grateful that I had my entire life fall apart I'm grateful that it happened at 28,
Right.
so that I could ask these questions that you're talking about of what is meaningful to me? What is my mission? Why am I here? And my life falling apart actually was a catalyst to waking up and to being able to consider, who was I created to be and why am I here? And,
Mhm.
Charlie is his name. And he said he's 55 years old. And this is the perfect time in some ways. It
Yeah.
really is. It's always, whenever our life falls apart and we do wake up, man, it's so devastating and so awful and so painful. And as Brian here in the chat said, what needed to happen, I'm so grateful he knows the truth. I'm so
Mhm.
grateful that I came to know, that you came to know the reality and truth of what is,
Right.
rather than having more time progress. So it's
Mhm.
like it gets darkest before the dawn.
Yeah. And to say it's the best thing, like, what's the better way to word that? That's more, it's not the best thing
Right.
that you ever had. That sounds like a
No.
terrible, but it's I don't, it's the most transformational, and
Yes.
the surprise is what's on the other side of it, because you never think in that moment that what's about to happen could happen. And I guess that's the special part of it, is you just never, ever in a million years in that moment would think there's something good on the other side of this. It's so hard to
Mm,
find in that, but it's so true. It's so true.
mm,
Sounds like that was your experience. That was definitely my experience, that what's on the other side is greater than what was lost.
yeah. Oh gosh. That's a way to say it. And it's funny. Just earlier today, we were talking with someone, and he was sharing about the 12-step program that he went through, and how that the 12 steps of Al-Anon, is that the acronym? Is that the right way
I'm
to
like,
say it? But Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps there. Um,
mhm,
one of them really is just allowing it to be what it is, and it's neither good nor bad. And
mhm,
that's something that I think is actually helpful in times like this, where it is like that actually truly was the most devastating. Well, that coupled with something else, it's kind of like, okay, these tragic moments in my life.
right.
And my dad said this to me, and I'm just going to get spiritual for a second, because on the show we talk about emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. And my dad said to me one time, if you can just believe God is good. And so our behavior and the decisions we make in terms of our response to the stimulus is really predicated in, as Viktor Frankl said, the choice, between stimulus and response is choice, but every choice is based on our belief. So what is our belief about
Mhm,
ourselves, about that person, about God, about the world? These moments are really what shake and uncover the very core of the nucleus of our life. What are the intrinsic and core beliefs that are our operating system at the end of the day? And often we don't get to see that. We don't actually get to know that until something like this happens. Going back to the Theodore Roosevelt concept of going into the arena, it's like these are the moments that we're prepping for by doing the work to know ourselves and ask these questions that you've shared throughout this entire conversation. These questions of what is life giving? Do I actually have the ability to handle joy? Do I have the ability to handle the vulnerability of when things are good, so that when things go bad, I actually have already been so filled up that I have a well from which to draw? I'm so grateful for you sharing, Panda. Thank you.
Of course, of course. I think the crux of all of this that we're talking about is this idea of joy, which is something that I don't talk about in my everyday life, right? In
Mm,
business, not really something we're talking about, but what you just said is, I think, really at the core of every part of this conversation, which is belief, right? Like we started off me talking about someone asking me, well, why did you think you could start a business, right? Like you were flat on your face and you needed a job. And what made you think you could do that? And it was like, I think I just believed that I could, right? Like it didn't occur to me to think that I couldn't. So I believed that I could. And I think that that's like, if you don't believe that something is going to be better, whether that's in your life or in your business, like that's actually that's the first step, right? Like if I'm working with a business owner on their finances, like you wouldn't think that's really tied to belief, but if you don't believe it's ever going to get better, it's probably not, right? Like we can look at the spreadsheets all day, but like there has to be this element of believing that like if we work on this, we can get it to where we want it to be. And it's just that's the thread in every part of this conversation is just an underlying core element of what do you believe and how much of what you're experiencing in your life is tied to what you believe can happen or what you believe can't happen. And it's again, it shows up, believe it or not, that shows up so much in business. So we know it shows up in our lives like that. There's no question about that. And if I can see that on a spreadsheet, then we know for sure it's happening in our lives. So it's just kind of an interesting, it's kind of the problem before the problem, right? Like before we can even talk about joy, what is the belief system that that it's even achievable? Like, can we even do that? Is
mm,
I think is is the starting place.
yeah, wow. It's, do I even believe that I deserve joy? So
Yeah.
that's huge. I mean, going back to that book, Stop Self Sabotage, that's kind of what the whole self sabotage concept is predicated on. You, based on what do you believe you deserve? And it's kind of like this deserve system in some ways of like, do I believe I actually deserve to be treated well? Do I actually believe that I deserve joy? Do I actually believe that I deserve to be paid for my services? And
Yeah,
it all
absolutely.
stems. Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good. So, y'all, I'm so grateful for your time, Panda, and I just kind of want to leave us all with a question for tonight around what are those core beliefs that are really operating your life based on what you believe you deserve, and also when something tragic happens to you, what are those core 1 to 3 beliefs that are kind of dictating how you then respond between stimulus and responses choice, and that choice is predicated in a belief. So, Panda, thank you so much. I know you have a tool that you are giving away to our audience, which I'm so grateful for, specifically around preparedness for business exit. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, yeah, it is an exit planning tool, but I want us to think about it a little bit differently in the context of this conversation, which is the mental preparedness for life after success, for exiting the business, whether that's soon because of something unexpected, whether that's we're planning for retirement, we're planning for a family, like whatever time that is. So I don't want just people who are at retirement age thinking that this is a tool for them. This is a tool for anyone who's in business to utilize, it's actually for, are you mentally prepared for leaving your business? And what's the life after you leave your business? And so it's going to take through a series of questions, and then I can send you the report that will have some insight for you after you complete the assessment for this. What is life after exit, and are you ready for that?
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I'm super excited. I pulled it up on my end and it looks amazing. I'm going to go ahead, y'all, and drop it here in the chat. And then we'll go ahead and put it also in the comments for the show. But Panda, thank you. How can people stay in touch beyond the tool?
Yeah, I LinkedIn is my spot. That is where I hang out. So please connect with me there. It's just Panda Ludwig. There are not very many pandas on LinkedIn. I promise you'll be able to find me. And do send me a message and say, hey, this is where I saw you, because I'd love to connect with you and talk more about what we discussed on the show today.
Well, thank you so much, Panda. Again, so grateful. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us on The Knowing Show. Go check out Panda on LinkedIn, and we will see you tomorrow morning for our show. Thank you so much, Panda, again for your time and just your vulnerability and kind of going first that allowed for others in the chat to show up and do the same. Grateful for you, my friend.
Thank you.
Y'all, we'll see you soon.